So, spend a little bit of time just explaining what data is. And I think everyone uses data. No one really, there's lots of different ways of looking at it, let's put it that way. So my view on data is as follows. Data is pretty much anything that gives you some information about a thing. Okay, now clearly I'm using very basic language here, but all of the IT systems, all of the things you do day in, day out are based on data. So I am currently looking at a sat nav. That sat nav is telling me how deep the water is, how fast I'm going, where I am in the Solent. There's a few other bits and pieces. If I was really clever, I could work it out to get it to tell me where fish are in the sea. There's all these things, and there's so many sources of data these days that makes it quite difficult to consume. And so a lot of the tools that we need to sort of invest in are really all about getting that tidy. But back to defining what data is. So data is information. It comes in lots of different formats. And the two main formats are structured data and unstructured data. So an example of structured data is things like spreadsheets. Everyone understands spreadsheets, or most people. And so you've got very clear columns and rows. You've got labels for each of the columns. There is a structure within which the data sits. So if I have a spreadsheet that is giving information about me, you can say name, date of birth, leg length, IQ, all these sorts of things, and you'll be able to quite quickly find out Phil has an IQ of 3, therefore he's an idiot. And that is structured data, and the reason why structured data is so useful is because you can ask it questions very easily and it will give you those answers. Unstructured data is things that don't sit in that structure, weirdly. So examples of that would be a page of text on a book, or even a website page, some pictures, even to an extent the image I'm looking at on my sat nav. All these things are unstructured data, and the reason is they're not in an easy to consume format. So you couldn't very easily interrogate a book of a page to find out information. You need to read all the information and you need to interpret it yourself. And probably what you end up doing in your mind is taking the unstructured data and putting it in the structure. So two main types of data, structured and unstructured. Structured, from an IT perspective, is so much easier to work with. It's very, very quick to resolve questions. It's very easy to look at, and there are loads of tools out there that you could use to manage your structured data. Most people use Microsoft Excel, plenty of other spreadsheets out there if you're interested. There are other sort of more structured tools such as databases, relational databases. All those things are there to store structured data. Unstructured data is a bit more difficult, but there are tools out there that allow you to store data. Most people store all of their data on things like SharePoint. All of the documents that you have aren't really in a structure. That's a data store in its own right, albeit unstructured. And so really where the world's going is trying to work out how you take unstructured data and you give it a structure, or you interpret it to make sure you can surface attributes around that thing. And a lot of the tools I'll talk about in a minute are really tools to help do that. The sort of second consideration is what are the different sources of data? Now, people think data and think IT. Those two things are specifically something just blanked, but those things are intrinsically linked, data and technology. But actually, there are probably a number of different sources of technology that aren't naturally IT things. Internal source of data is all of the things you probably use every day. So things like HR data in your HR system, your emails, your website, any other business system, they all have data and they're all internal to your organization, and hopefully as a result pretty secure, pretty easy to access, etc. You also have external source of data. Now, in the case of this boat, I'm looking at SatNav. It's using GPS to tell me where I am. That's an external source of data. I looked at my phone this morning to check the weather. The weather came from the Met Office. The Met Office is an external source of data. So you can get hold of data really easily and integrate it into your business processes. I'm currently integrating where I am into my driving process. So external source of data are really important, and the data industry is massive. People selling data to enrich decisions that they're making is big, big business. and even things like credit checks for individuals, or company's house, which is a source of data from the government that tells you about companies. All those things are really, really high value, and therefore in some cases high cost, external source of data. A fairly new third source of data that's probably worth considering is what would be called Internet of Things devices, or sensors. Now that is, the world is full of cameras and sensors and things that are monitoring processes and things, and it's picking up data about how hot it is outside, or how windy it is, or whether my manufacturing process is working correctly, or whether I've got a printer jam on one of my printers. All those things are what we've got IoT source of data, Internet of Things source of data. And again, not external, because they're usually in your organization, but they'll tell you things that are going on in your world that you probably need to consider if there's things that, if that's a useful source of data for you. So IoT devices, or sensors, or some people call it operational technology, all those things probably will give you a source of data that will be useful to your processes. And the final one that most people are aware of, the web and cloud services. So you can go onto the internet and get information about pretty much anything. That is a source of data. Similarly, cloud services, there are plenty of what we call APIs, or interfaces you can build into ready-made sources of data to extract information from across the internet. And so those four sources of data are pretty ubiquitous now, but if you can get your head around those things when you're a procurement person, buying from those four different sources has different commercial connotations. Internal data, you're not so worried about intellectual property and data privacy stuff because it's in your domain. External can be a little bit more complicated because it's somebody else's data, so you need to make sure you have rights to use it. IoT devices can be a bit difficult to integrate into things, and web and cloud services, well, need to read the terms and conditions to make sure you can use the data in the way that you want to use it. So that's your four sources of data that really sort of focus for today. So what I'm going to do for the rest of this segment is probably split it into lots of different chunks and look at probably 7 or 8 different categories of tools that you can use to analyze data. Firstly is data collection. So how can you actually collect data to make it useful for your processes, what you're doing? Secondly, data storage. How do you store that data once you've collected it? Then you look at data processing, data analysis, data governance. So what can you do to control the data and make sure it's current? Data visualization, fancy graphs, and data integration. How do you make all the data work together? I've got a little segment for each of those. There are probably other data tools that you can use, but fundamentally they're the ones that I'm probably most interested in. And hopefully you'll see, by the way I'm positioning this, it's really important to get this right, because if you're implementing artificial intelligence, you'll be in a position where you need to make sure all that data stuff is working correctly so your AI engine makes the right decisions.